Good evening, my friends. This is Paul, and tonight I'm going to be reviewing to you AI the Somnium Files, the Nirvana initiative for the Nintendo Switch. I really don't talk about the original Somnium Files enough on this YouTube channel, as I really loved the story in that game, and I loved the central hook of being able to go inside people's dreams to get information out of them. I'm a huge fan of the Zero Escape trilogy. It's actually my favorite gaming franchise, and the same director and scenario writer returned to make these Somnium Files games. Now, I didn't actually think there would be a sequel to Somnium Files. I thought that original game wrapped things up really well. So when I was browsing through Gamefly one day looking for new games to rent, I was like, wait, what? A new Somnium Files game? That's cool. And literally the only thing I knew about it going in was that Mizuki, one of the side characters in Somnium Files, was now going to be the main character, and I'm glad that's all that I knew, because this is definitely one of those narrative-heavy games that rewards you for going in as blind as possible. Now, just as a disclaimer, this game, even though it's a sequel, it tries very hard to be newbie friendly, just in case you happened to pick this up first. And I think for the most part, it succeeds at that. There is a certain character that looks really out of place if you know what happened to that character in the previous game, and there is this really weird quiz show at the beginning of the game that asks if you're familiar with the events of the previous game, and then says, we're asking this so that we can see if you want spoilers or not. But I personally tried both options of saying I don't know and I do know, and I didn't notice any differences in the dialogue. Either that, or maybe I just didn't pay attention much. I do think that certain scenes might make a little bit more sense if you know what happened, but for the most part, it's a relatively standalone experience. Now, onto the main gameplay. So, you play as two cops, Ryuki, who's a newcomer to the series, and Mizuki, returning from the previous game, now 6 years older. And you keep switching between their perspectives to solve what's called the HB case. I won't give any more details from there, because again, this is a game where you want to know as little about the story as possible. While you still do the investigations, as you did in the previous game, you now have the ability to do crime scene recreations, where you get to move around either Ryuki or Mizuki around in 3D space, and you can switch between normal mode, X-ray mode, and even thermal mode, where you can see heat waves. And this allows you to essentially figure out how the culprit committed the deed without having to overly visualize everything. Like, you can literally see right in front of you what the crime scene looked like. Then you also have the Somnia returning from the previous game, where you control the artificial intelligence character that's located within each of the cops' left eye. So in the case of Mizuki, she gets Aiba, returning from the previous game, and Ryuki gets a new artificial intelligence called Tama, who's more or less Aiba, but slightly more inappropriate and slightly more proportionally exaggerated. But either way, they basically play the same, where you guide them around in 3D space in a dreamlike world, and you'll interact with various objects and try to think what is the interaction you're supposed to do to progress through the sinker's subconscious. Now, because this is within a dream and not the real world, you're not necessarily going to be applying the same logic as you would in a regular escape room. So, for example, in the very first Somnium, you see a torch. And in the real world, you'd think, okay, if there's a torch, I can blow it out with my breath. But in the Somnium world, inhaling the fire of the torch is actually what you need to do. So you need to figure out the individual rules of each Somnium to proceed. These are immaculately designed, and they were far less frustrating than the original games, as I only had maybe 4 game overs, which is far less than I had in the first game. And I think that's mainly due to the fact that one of the coolest new features in Nirvana Initiative is the ability to change the difficulty in both the investigations and in the Somnium separately. The only reason you'd want to change the difficulty in the real world is because sometimes there are quick time events, and not everyone is a big fan of those. I personally thought they were pretty cool, albeit they also felt a little bit unnecessary at the same time. But then again, toggling story mode meant I didn't have to worry about them too much. In the Somnium, you can affect how much time passes and how much you're able to explore. Because according to the game world, you're only allowed to stay inside a Somnium for 6 minutes. And obviously that doesn't keep track of it in real time. But the various actions that you do take up time on your clock, as well as moving Aiba or Tama around. Simply walking gets rid of some of the time. So your job is to try to minimize how much you interact with to make sure that you don't run out of time. But by offsetting the difficulty mode, which you couldn't do in the previous game, you can make it so that it takes maybe 1 second to do something that might have taken like 30 seconds in the previous game. And this was really good because it felt like I was never overwhelmed and I was able to take my time and really think about what I needed to do. In addition to that, the game also has a new currency called eyeballs, which are primarily gained in the Somnia world. There are several things that can get you hidden eyeballs, such as just finding them lying around in the Somnium itself, by doing different tasks, so the game actually rewards you for experimenting, by completing the Somnium to begin with, and by completing the Somnium with more than 100 seconds left on the clock. So the game definitely encourages a more completionist vibe than the first game did, where you kind of just beat the game and we're done with it, whereas this actually encourages replay value. One thing that I don't really like about the Somnium that was sort of fixed, but also sort of wasn't from the first game, is that Aiba and Tama are more or less half-naked women that you're ordering around to do various tasks, some of which involve panty shots. And while you can dress them up in various outfits to offset this, you can't actually put them in the outfits until you complete a scene, which is like, I'm pretty sure most people would have preferred the option to have them dress a little bit more modestly. Now, I mean, it's not like they do anything that's like pornographic or anything, but it still might make some people uneasy to control that kind of dressed girl in this kind of environment. So I definitely wish that the costumes would have been applicable right away, especially because some of them are really hilarious Zero Escape references. There are also DLC costumes that you can purchase on the eShop, as well as a few that you can download for free, which are decent, I guess, but I personally prefer what the game gave me on its own because, man, those were hilarious. What you use the eyeballs for after you gather them is there's a bonus menu, which is also new to Nirvana Initiative, and you use those eyeballs as currency to purchase new outfits for Aiba and Tama, as well as concept art and a certain post-game surprise that I really don't want to spoil you, apart from saying that fans of Zero Escape will be in for a real treat. And overall, I really like the fact that you have more to collect and more to do if you're a completionist. But on the other hand, I do think it's weird that you have to turn off the game, or more specifically, you have to load back to the main menu, then buy the stuff, then load back into your save file, and then you can apply the bonus material. It's like, why not just have a bonus menu? I mean, the game literally has an option for bonuses in the pause menu, but it'll say save your progress and unlock the bonus menu. Like, I don't know, it just seems like too many hoops to jump through. So now that we've established that this game is more or less a refinement of the original game, I want to briefly discuss a couple of issues I had with it, as the original Somnium Files had its fair share of problems, and while this game is improved in just about every single way you can imagine, there are still a few gripes I have. Most of them have to do with the presentation, as Spike Chunsoft games, especially the ones directed by Kotaro Uchikoshi, have never been known for having great graphics. This game is no exception. There are occasionally some artistically inspiring Somnia, but overall the graphical fidelity is quite bland. oftentimes the textures feel like they're the bare minimum of what needs to be done to make it feel convincing. A lot of times there are also some performance issues, but the thing is that the performance issues aren't consistent. Like, you'll have these heavy action scenes that involve tons of people at once that'll run just fine. But then you'll have the scene cutting to black with only dialogue boxes, and those will slow to a screech. So it's like, why isn't it the other way around? For that matter, how is a text-heavy game with this poor of graphics taxing the Switch that much? It feels so weird. The action sequences are fun to watch, but they feel so cheesy and unrealistic. Like, how are these people surviving in these kinds of environments? Like, this person realistically should have been dead, even if you take into account the lore of this game. It still is a bit of a stretch of the imagination. I also think that while it makes sense later, initial players might be a little bit frustrated that this game's selling point is that you play as Mizuki, but since you also play as Ryuki, you get to switch perspectives. This isn't anything new for a Spike Chunsoft game. World's End Club did this, Zero Escape did this, but in this kind of game, you play as Ryuki for a very, very long time before you switch back to Mizuki, and then after you switch to Mizuki, you never have to play as Ryuki again until a certain post-game scene. So, if you're the type of person that's looking forward to a side character being a protagonist, you have a long time to wait. Thankfully, to offset it, Ryuki's cases are 6 years in the past, and at that point, Mizuki was still a little girl like she was in the first game. So you still see her, you just don't get to play as her right away. And again, it makes more sense as it goes along, but it still might disappoint long-term fans. Thankfully, I really like Ryuki as a character. He comes across as really strange and eccentric at first, but then once it's explained why he's like that, then it's like, oh my gosh, he is like actually secretly really brilliant. In fact, that was one of the biggest complaints I had about Somnium Files as a whole, was that I didn't like the characters. And I can say that that issue has been more or less resolved for the sequel. All of the new characters have some amazing development and moments to shine, and all of the returning characters are either just as tolerable as they were at the end of the first game, or they've received an overhaul that gives them a better role. And I just overall don't really have too many complaints in the character department, apart from a lot of over-the-top sex jokes, including repeated jokes about the male genitalia that are said over and over again in one scene. Like, okay, once I can get, but 3 times in one scene is a little bit much. I also think that the flowchart was designed much, much better than the first games. In the first game's case, it looked like an abstract painting, but in this, it actually feels like a proper family tree design that Virtue's Last Reward would remind you of. One of the biggest things that you'll love about Nirvana Initiative is its story, as this game is constantly throwing twists and turns at you in typical Kotaro Uchikoshi fashion. And you're probably not going to guess that twist. I certainly didn't, and I've played pretty much every major Uchikoshi game since 999 came out, so if I couldn't do it, you probably can't either. However, one thing that does kind of hold back the story is when the investigations force you to solve a puzzle without giving you adequate tools for how to solve it. Like, you'll be given a riddle, but you're not told enough information about how to solve the riddle, which is really baffling because there's a Somnium later in the game where Aiba will literally say, "Do you want me to solve this puzzle for you?" And you can say yes. But you can't do that in the investigation. You're just told, "Oh, here's some letters. You should be able to figure it out from here." And it's like, I really wish the game would have taken a cue from Virtue's Last Reward and had an easy mode toggle, as a lot of these puzzles were not only ridiculously cryptic and really stretching the logic, but some of them I didn't even know what I was supposed to do to solve it. So I ended up looking at a walkthrough at least twice. One of the puzzles I solved right when I was about to look up a walkthrough, but I think that was just dumb luck as opposed to me actually being smart. So if you could look past a handful of those riddles in the investigations, and a couple of performance issues, and taking your sweet time to control Mizuki, you are in for a fantastic experience. Everything I complained is more or less a nitpick, and I'm pretty sure this is going to be my game of the year of 2022. And not just because there are some hilarious Zero Escape reference moments in here, although that's definitely a huge factor. Unless Nintendo has some major, gigantic, amazing game in the works that's coming later in 2022, you can expect Nirvana Initiative to get my highest praise. Now, I personally think that this is the type of game that you probably should just go out and buy instead of rent it like I did, but it costs $60 at the moment. However, the original Somnium Files went on sale a couple of days ago for only $8. So this isn't a Nintendo game, so maybe this game will go down significantly in price. While the replay value is actually much better, as you'll definitely want to replay this game again after you beat it, and there's actually a post game where you get to do even more cool stuff. I'm not going to say what else, but there's a really cool moment that made me laugh out loud. So I definitely think that automatically makes it like not rental worthy because you would want to replay it and because this game is so long and you're going to get a lot of content. But the graphical issues and some of those annoying puzzles might also make players say, I'll wait for a sale, because a $60 game should probably have more of its glaring issues ironed out. So with that, thank you very much for watching. I really hope you guys can check this out in some way, shape, or form. Unless you have a bad stomach or don't like sex jokes or can't handle M-rated games, I highly recommend picking this up. Even if you haven't played the first Somnium Files, you should be good for most of the game, as it does a pretty good job of standing alone. So with that, thank you very much for watching. Let me know down in the comment section if I missed anything or if you need clarification. And until the next time, keep the faith, stay epic, and God bless. Bye!